Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, it's been no secret that the fellas are extremely high on this Oregon Ducks program heading into 2024, and we've spent a majority of this offseason giving out flowers to this Oregon Ducks program, talking about what makes them so dangerous in 2024. You look at this roster and you say, you make no mistakes. This is a national championship caliber roster, but what we haven't really dove into this offseason is where does Oregon need to take the steps heading into 2024 to become that national championship caliber team? You look back at 2023, that was a national championship team that just fell short in a couple of key areas. Want to get into some of those aspects that, you want to see Oregon take that step in going into 2024. Extremely fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Oregon Duck fans. You all know it's been a blast for the boys to talk about this program, but more importantly, the amount of support you guys have shown. It's been absolutely amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some feedback from you guys. We continue to learn from you guys in the comment section. Drop in the comment section some of the aspects you want to see Oregon take that step in heading into 2024. And Dill, let's start on the offensive side of the football, where you make no mistake, this is an elite unit in 2024, was an elite unit in 2023. And I was kind of playing around with this idea the last couple of days. Okay, you lose Bo Nix, you replace him with, one of the most experienced, productive, prolific quarterbacks in college football, and Dillon Gabriel, who I think fits this Oregon offense exceptionally well. Dill, around Dillon Gabriel, am I crazy to say that this Oregon team might be better on offense than it was in 2023?
No, and you look, they're bringing back so many key guys to what they had. Obviously, up front, you return your two big-time tackles and add a couple of young guys who I think are really good. But I think the biggest thing is that receiver room, I just don't see taking much of a step back. Honestly, I think it could get a lot better.
Yeah.
Troy Franklin was good, but there's maybe a reason he went fourth round. I don't know that he had that well-rounded game that maybe Evan Stewart has. He obviously get over the top. Evan Stewart, I think, can get over the top. We just didn't get to see it a ton at A&M because that was a very stagnant offense. There's a reason that obviously blew up over there. I think just like when you look at him with the ball in his hands, far more electric, really good doing that. And you kind of look, I think he rounds out a really good wide receiver room, especially with Ted Johnson probably being the most.
You dig into this wide receiver room, and I don't think it's crazy to say both Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson 12 months from now are going to be higher picks than Troy Franklin. And this is not me knocking Troy Franklin. Quite frankly, I thought it was a crime that he went in the fourth round to begin with. Was a top 5 wide receiver in my mind in the country.
Evan Stewart might be a top 10. I remember talking about him as a true freshman. Like, well, this guy, when he goes out, we're going to be talking about him like we talked about Marvin Harris.
12 months ago, you had Evan Stewart as the number 2 wide receiver in the country. And again, you look back to his tenure at Texas A&M, specifically in that 2023 year. Quarterback got hurt. Texas A&M as a program just kind of blew up. Obviously, they fired Jimbo Fisher. Dill, Evan Stewart, you make no mistake about it, I think is an upgrade from Troy Franklin. And then you look at Tez Johnson. I think that Dillon Gabriel-Tez Johnson connection is going to be absolutely lethal. And then you look at Trayshawn Holden, a guy that is just kind of getting swept under the rug, but he is a wide receiver one on a lot of programs across the country. Potentially Jurion Dickey, breakout year as a sophomore. You sprinkle in guys like Kyle Casper and Gary Bryant. I look at this Oregon team and say, I think this wide receiver room probably takes a step in the right direction.
And then you look at that pass catching unit as a whole, and you look at the tight end room. You still have Terrence Ferguson, one of the better, just more solid, prototypical tight ends you kind of want in college football. Really doesn't drop a ton of balls and figures out how to deal with the middle of the field. But you have a freak show in Kenyon City. He can get rolling. Is like that different level of talent than Oregon's probably had in a little while. Kyle Casper, you look at him, you just have a couple more weapons, I think, that are a little bit more dynamic maybe than anything you had last year. Just like guys who you look at and it's like, well, if they're on, I don't know how you deal with them.
So you round this out and say you got 2 first-round caliber tackles and Josh Conley Jr. and a Johnny Cornelius. You got a running back room that you lose Bucky Irving. I was a massive fan of Bucky Irving. Jordan James averaged 7 yards per carry last year. That was top 5 in the country. You add Jay Harris. You get Noah Whittington back. I look at this team around Dillon Gabriel and say, I think this is a better offense than what you saw in 2023. An offense that was top 5 in pretty much every statistical category you wanted to see. Now, I think the big question marks for a lot of Oregon fans is on the defensive side of the football, right? And you scroll down and take a look at the defense. There are three key numbers that I want to talk about for this Oregon defense. And it starts up front. They were 100th in the country in tackles for loss, right? Creating negative plays is something that we talk so much about. It is crucial in elite defenses in the country, right? You look at Georgia under Dan Lanning, the last couple of years, elite defense, it started in the front seven creating negative plays. You look at Michigan last year, it started in the front seven creating negative plays. Dill, I look at this defensive line and say, all right, where do we expect it to take a step in the right direction? A couple of different points I want to talk about. One, you add two of the better interior defensive linemen that we saw in the transfer portal, Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell. Now, I'm not taking shots at guys like Popo or guys like Casey Rogers. Those guys are difference makers up front versus the guys that we saw in 2023 were just kind of solid players. And then you look at the edge rusher spots and say, Mateo Yu, Tatum, Blake Purchase, they were all true freshmen. All of them played over 200 snaps for the Ducks last year. You expect those guys to take steps in the right direction heading into their second year of college football. You return Jordan Burch. Dill, if they can create some more negative plays, I think this Oregon team, that's kind of where you want to see them take that step heading into 2024.
And I'm with you. When they just played really good teams, they just couldn't stifle teams. They couldn't look like they were the better unit or the A side in that matchup. And you even games they won, you go to Texas Tech. I mean, that's just not a very good defensive performance, obviously. Both games against Washington, you kind of stand out. Even Washington State, it's like games that just you feel like you're giving up too many yards to teams that if you want to play at that, again, when you're splitting hairs trying to win national championships, it can't look like that really ever. It needs to look like the Oregon State game. That's kind of the game I look to. If they play like that every game, they probably win a national championship because you just look really good on defense against a really tough offense. Good offensive line can run the ball, obviously had good skill. That's the way they need to play every game. So you saw like your moments of it, your flashes, but you just didn't see whole games of it enough against the really good teams. That's what you're looking for.
And I think you made a great point. Like winning a national championship, it comes into the margins. Like there's a reason this Oregon team could have won in 2023, can certainly win it in 2024. You kind of have to make those key plays in the big moments that win you football games. What are the key plays that we talk on the defensive side of football? Tackles for loss, those kill drives, and then sacks. I mean, this was an Oregon team that, again, was top 20 in the country in points per game allowed. This was a good defense last year. Failed to make those critical plays. 6.7% sack rate. That was 54th in the country. It's not bad, but it probably isn't national championship caliber. And if you can see guys like a guy like Tatum that we saw in the spring game look to be a guy, that's kind of where Oregon takes that step. You look last year, I mean, their leading pass rusher was Brandon Dorless with only a 10% pass rush win rate. I mean, that's probably just not good enough when you talk about winning a national championship. And I think the last number I want to talk about, and another key statistic, when you talk about winning big football games, forcing turnovers. 1.3 turnovers forced per game. That was 81st in the country. What does Dan Lanning go out and do? You land a guy like Jabbar Muhammad, 3 interceptions last year. You go out and grab Kobe Savage, 6 interceptions during the last 2 seasons at Kansas State. Cam Alexander, 2 interceptions from UTSA. You can tell that there was an emphasis by Dan Lanning and this Oregon staff, and they looked at this Oregon team and said, all right, we need to improve on the defensive line, get some veterans that can dominate, take over games on the inside, and then in the back end, we got to get some guys that can make those game-changing plays. You look at Jabbar Muhammad, you look at Kobe Savage, Cam Alexander, even true freshman Aaron Flowers, and say those are some guys that can make those difference-making plays that you talk about, just 2 games, 1-possession games. Those are the plays that decide those games. Those are the plays that win you national championships.
Yeah, and then the final thing for me, I think, is just getting more into a rhythm of what Dan Lanning's doing defensively. I think again, you kind of, especially at that linebacker unit, and I like those linebackers. I think there's a reason you don't see a ton of orange with transfers coming into that room. I think it's really good. I think even you look to those younger guys, obviously some of the freshmen, Braden Platt looks, hey, he might be a freak. I mean, you have enough linebackers to play really good football, but they have to play faster. I think especially when you look at those Washington games, a team that does a really good job of creating an offense that puts up linebackers in bad positions, it always felt like they were a gap behind. It felt like it was very easy for Washington to get the edges, work that pitch game and get a lot of yards. to me, I think those two are too good to play the way they played in certain games last year. I think those are another couple guys who need a big year. In a year that, like, they both should be getting drafted. They're that type of guys, especially Justin Jacobs. I think he's got as much talent as anyone at that linebacker spot, but they need to have a better year, I think.
Tackles for loss, sacking the quarterback, turnovers. If they take marginal steps in the right direction in 2024, that's, in my mind, the recipe to win a national championship. And then the last thing you just have to talk about when you talk about winning a national championship is how the schedule plays out. And Dill, looking at this 2024 schedule, if Oregon is as good as I think they are, they got 2 games. I'm not, Dan Lanning's not overlooking games. Like, you make no mistake about it. Idaho's a massive game week 1. But you take a look at the 2 games, you get Ohio State and Michigan. And I think the 2 things you want to talk about is, one, Ohio State is probably that team in the Big Ten. It's certainly a team that can win a national championship. I think the biggest thing is you get them at home. That is going to be a rowdy environment. One of the biggest games in college football. That's massive to get them in Autzen Stadium. And then you go on the road to Ann Arbor, the defending national champions. And many of y'all know I'm a Michigan fan. There's a lot of question marks about this Michigan team. I'm really excited about this Oregon team. We're going to dive into the game at Autzen Stadium against Ohio State. We're going to dive into on the road in Ann Arbor.
Frankly, you look at those 2 matchups. I mean, what Oregon's going to do is put a lot of pressure on teams to score. I think, Frankie, you look at Michigan and Ohio State. I think both are going to be led from that defensive side of the ball. Well, you don't think about Ryan Day defense, but this Ohio State offense, I think you have a lot more questions about than what they have defensively. So again, 2 teams that don't necessarily or may not have the quarterback to keep up with you if you can really light it up. And again, I think Oregon, just looking at how complete they are, I don't think they get dominated up front by either team, which is a big thing because those 2 teams, that's where they're going to shut teams down and play that stifling defense we kind of talked about wanting to see from Oregon. That's where they're going to play it. I think Oregon's tough enough up front to just be competitive. I'm not going to say they're going to dominate those 2 units, but again, I think they can put a lot of pressure on both those teams by scoring a lot and forcing them to throw the ball.
And I'll tell you what, that game in Autzen Stadium against Ohio State, that's when you're going to need the pass rush. Because you look at where Ohio State has the biggest question marks, it's on the offensive line. And again, if that Oregon defensive line can kind of become the elite unit that I think they can be in 2024, I like their chances. Hosting Ohio State in Autzen Stadium. We'll continue to break down this team from a lot of different angles over the summer. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. We'll cut it now. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.